The galaxy comprises 17 star systems, each home to multiple sentient species. At the apex of the entire galactic hierarchy stands the Arkoth, a fearsome, four-armed reptilian species renowned for unmatched strength, pack intelligence, and near invulnerability. The Arkoth enforce a tribute economy. Lesser worlds pay rare resources to avoid predatory raids. Galactic governments plan trade routes, military exercises, and diplomatic summits around Arkoth migration patterns. Dr. Mira Lang, a human xenomedical specialist aboard the research vessel Pioneer, struggled with minor ship malfunctions and uncooperative bacteriological samples in her lab. Her morning had begun with a faulty air recycler that left her workspace smelling faintly of processed algae. And now, her latest extremophile culture refused to grow under controlled conditions. "Stubborn little microbes," she muttered, adjusting the microscope's settings with practiced precision. The Pioneer had been commissioned to study bacterial adaptations in deep space, hardly glamorous work, but essential for understanding how life might spread between worlds. Mira's colleagues often marveled at her patience. While others sought assignments to catalog exotic megafauna or document sentient species migration patterns, she preferred the methodical isolation of her laboratory. Microbes didn't posture or play politics. They simply existed, adapted, and occasionally revealed extraordinary secrets to those disciplined enough to study them. "Dr. Lang," the intercom crackled. "Engineering reports the ventilation issue should be resolved within the hour." "Tell Rail his definition of resolved has been questionable at best," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Last time he fixed something, my cultures grew mold for a week." Dr. Rail Voss, the ship's chief engineer, had been struggling with the Pioneer's aging systems since their departure from the research hub at Proxima Station. The vessel wasn't designed for extended missions, but budget constraints had forced their team to make do with increasingly unreliable equipment. Mira carefully sealed her latest sample and recorded her observations. Strain ZB142 shows resistance to conventional growth media. Possible silicon-based metabolic pathway? Further analysis required. Her meticulous nature had earned her a reputation throughout the Terran Science Council as someone who never overlooked details, no matter how seemingly insignificant. The ship's lights flickered, dimmed, and then flared back to life. Mira sighed. Another power fluctuation. At this rate, they'd be lucky to complete half their assigned research before returning to base. The first indication that something was wrong came not as an alarm, but as a sudden, oppressive silence. The constant hum of the ship's ventilation system cut out entirely. The air felt unusually heavy, charged with an unfamiliar static electricity. Then came the flash, a brilliant, purplish light that flooded her laboratory, momentarily blinding her. When her vision cleared, Mira found herself staring at a nightmare made flesh. 4 massive figures stood in her laboratory, each towered nearly 8 feet tall, with scaled bodies that gleamed like polished obsidian under the fluorescent lights. 4 muscular arms protruded from torsos covered in ceremonial armor, each limb ending in wickedly curved talons. Their elongated reptilian heads featured rows of serrated teeth visible behind lipless mouths, and vertical slit pupils within amber eyes tracked her every movement. Arkoth, the deadliest predators in known space, the apex species that 17 systems paid tribute to avoid confronting. And they were standing in her laboratory, between her and the door. Most humans would have screamed, frozen in terror, or made a futile attempt to hide. Mira Lang did none of these things. Instead, she glanced at her chronometer and sighed deeply. "You're kidding me," she said flatly. "I'm already 3 days behind on these cultures. And now this? Couldn't you have materialized in the diplomatic section, or literally anywhere else?" The lead Arkoth, distinguishable by elaborate scarification patterns across its chest plates, tilted its massive head, clearly taken aback by her reaction. It had expected terror, not irritation. "Human," it growled, voice like gravel being crushed. You will accompany us for species evaluation. Mira glanced at her unfinished reports. Then, back at the imposing creatures. Species evaluation? Is that what you're calling abduction these days? Very well, but I need to log this interruption in the system. Research continuity protocols. She turned toward her terminal, as if the presence of 4 lethal predators was a minor inconvenience rather than a death sentence. The lead Arkoth, a senior war leader named Karax, stepped forward with a hiss. Your cooperation is irrelevant. You come now. Look, Mira said, saving her data with quick keystrokes. I understand you probably have some sort of schedule to maintain. Quota of terrified specimens to collect and all that. But I have protocols too. Do you at least have the proper containment facilities? What about preservation methods for the equipment you're inevitably going to confiscate? I hope you've thought this through better than the last interstellar expedition that disrupted my work. Her matter-of-fact tone seemed to confuse the predators. They exchanged glances, a surprisingly human gesture that betrayed uncertainty. Karax's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of Arkoth confusion rarely witnessed by outsiders. You show no fear, he stated, sounding almost accusatory. Mira finally looked up from her terminal, meeting his amber gaze directly. Should I? Will it make this process more efficient? Because honestly, between the ship malfunctions and these stubborn cultures, I'm already at my quota for frustration today. Before Karax could respond, one of the other Arkoth activated a device on its wrist guard. The purple light engulfed them once more, and Mira felt the distinctive disorientation of teleportation technology, a sensation like being turned inside out and reassembled a molecule at a time. When reality stabilized, she found herself no longer on the Pioneer, but in what was unmistakably an Arkoth vessel. The chamber was vast, dimly lit by reddish lighting that cast long shadows across metal floors, etched with intricate patterns. The air carried a distinctive musk, a combination of reptilian pheromones and something metallic, like old blood. Well, Mira said, looking around critically, your air filtration needs serious work. I'm counting at least 3 different strains of airborne bacteria just from the smell. No wonder your species has such respiratory issues in deep space deployments. Karax's head snapped toward her, jaws slightly parted in what might have been surprise. You know of our deployments? I'm a xenomedical specialist with a focus on extremophile pathogens, Mira replied, as if explaining to a particularly slow student. The Terran Science Council has documented every major species' physiological responses to deep space conditions. Your kind experiences elevated mucus production and scale desiccation after extended void exposure. Basic knowledge. She pointed to dark streaks of microbial growth along the ventilation ducts. And that's Pseudomonas xenophaga, thrives in recycled air systems, causes nasty respiratory infections in most reptilian species. You really should address that. The Arkoth guards looked at each other again, clearly unsettled by her clinical assessment. They had expected to intimidate their captive with the fearsome environment of their vessel, not receive hygienic critiques. You will follow, Karax commanded, though his tone carried less certainty than before. The 10th hunt requires your presence. As they led her through winding corridors, Mira noted the ship's layout, designed to disorient and intimidate with its lack of right angles and unpredictable level changes. The walls displayed trophies from countless hunts, bones, preserved specimens, weapons claimed from conquered species. Under different circumstances, it might have been terrifying. To Mira's analytical mind, it was simply inefficient design that harbored unnecessary microbial growth. Where exactly are we going? She asked, after several minutes of walking. If this is about studying human physiology, I can save you some time. Our complete biological profile is available through standard diplomatic channels. No need for all this theatrical abduction. Karax didn't respond, but his secondary arms twitched slightly, a tell that Mira recognized from xenobiological briefings as indicating discomfort or uncertainty. They arrived at what appeared to be a central chamber. Unlike the rest of the ship, this room was brightly lit and featured equipment that resembled crude medical apparatus. In the center lay a massive Arkoth, even larger than Karax, strapped to a metal platform. Mira immediately noticed something was wrong. The Arkoth's scales, which should have gleamed with health, appeared dull and flaking. Yellowish fluid seeped from between the plates, and its breathing came in labored rasps. 4 Arkoth attendants surrounded the platform, waving smoking incense burners and chanting in their guttural language. "This is Sarnath, Alpha of the 10th Hunt," Karax announced gravely. "He suffers the wasting. Our healers cannot purge the curse." Mira's professional demeanor shifted instantly. Despite the absurdity of her situation, her medical training kicked in. She approached the platform without hesitation, eyes narrowing as she assessed the symptoms. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, her tone now clipped and focused. 7 cycles," replied one of the attendants, ceasing the ritualistic chanting. "The purification rites have failed. The Void claims him." Mira scoffed. "The Void isn't claiming anything. This is a bacterial infection, possibly systemic." She reached toward Sarnath, only to find her wrist suddenly caught in Karax's iron grip. "You dare touch the Alpha without cleansing," he hissed. "I dare try to save his life," she replied evenly. "Which is more than your smoke and chanting seem to be doing. Now, I need to examine him properly. Either help me or get out of my way." A tense silence followed. Then, surprisingly, Karax released her wrist. "Proceed, but know that if he dies by your hand, you will suffer beyond imagination. If he dies because you delayed proper treatment with superstitious nonsense, that's on you," Mira retorted, pulling a compact medical scanner from her pocket. Standard equipment for xenobiologists on field assignments. It was calibrated to analyze a wide range of physiological indicators across species. As she ran the device over Sarnath's massive form, the readings confirmed her suspicions. Multiple infection sites, bacterial, not viral, likely entered through wounds sustained during what? A hunt? A territorial dispute? One of the attendants, distinguishable by elaborate facial tattoos, stepped forward. The Alpha led the raid on the Zephyrian outpost. Their weapons carried poisons. "Not poison," Mira corrected, studying the scanner's display. "Bacteria, specifically adapted to target reptilian physiology." She looked up, meeting Karax's gaze. "This is a bioweapon, and your purification rituals are making it worse. The heat from those incense burners is creating a perfect breeding environment for the pathogen." Outrage rippled through the attendants. The tattooed one stepped forward aggressively. "You mock our sacred rites? The cleansing fire drives away the curse." "The cleansing fire is killing him faster," Mira snapped. "I need proper medical equipment, antibiotics, tissue regenerators, and sterile conditions, not interpretive chanting and smoke that's basically a bacterial growth medium." Karax's massive hand moved to his weapon, a gesture that would have terrified most beings. Mira didn't flinch. "You speak with unusual certainty, human," he said slowly. "Because I'm certain," she replied. "Look, I understand cultural differences. You have your traditions. But right now, Sarnath needs medicine, not ritual. Let me help him, or watch him die. Your choice." After what seemed an eternity, Karax nodded once. "What do you require?" "First, get those incense burners out of here. I need clean air. Then bring me my field kit from the Pioneer. It should have enough supplies to start treatment." To the attendant's visible shock, Karax issued commands that aligned with Mira's requests. The burning sensors were removed, and within minutes, an Arkoth subordinate returned with Mira's xenomedical field kit, teleported, directly from her laboratory. "Everyone not directly assisting needs to leave," she ordered, unpacking her equipment with practiced efficiency. "And those staying need to sterilize their hands and claws. I don't care what ceremonial significance your body paints have. They're coming off before you touch anything in here." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Mira worked methodically, first administering broad-spectrum antibiotics specifically formulated for reptilian physiology, then cleaning and treating the infected wounds. She instructed the remaining attendants in basic antiseptic techniques, berating them when they reverted to ritual gestures instead of following her protocols. "Stop waving your claws over the wound and apply pressure here," she snapped at one point. "Your superior genes won't repel germs. Only proper hygiene will." Karax observed silently from the periphery, his amber eyes never leaving Mira as she worked. Occasionally, he would translate her more technical instructions into the Arkoth language for the attendants who struggled with the common galactic tongue. By the 12th hour, Sarnoth's condition had stabilized. His fever subsided, and the yellow discharge from his scales had diminished significantly. Mira, exhausted but satisfied, finally stepped back from the platform. "He'll live," she announced, wiping sweat from her brow. "But he needs continued antibiotic treatment for at least another 7 days. And this ship needs a complete decontamination. You're all carriers of the same bacteria. It's just not affecting you yet because your immune systems aren't compromised like his was." Karax approached, studying Sarnoth's improved condition with obvious amazement. "The wasting has never been reversed before." "Because you've been treating a medical condition with religious rituals," Mira replied bluntly. "Look, I don't mean to disparage your culture, but there's a difference between respecting tradition and letting it kill you. Bacteria don't care about your ceremonies or your status as apex predators. They're older and more adaptable than any sentient species in the galaxy." As if to punctuate her point, Sarnoth's eyes flickered open, clear and alert for the first time in days. He growled something in the Arkoth language that Mira couldn't understand, but it caused the attendants to bow deeply. "He asked your name," Karax translated. "Dr. Mira Lang, Xenomedical Specialist, Terran Science Council," she replied formally. Sarnoth's massive head turned toward her, jaws parting slightly, in what might have been an attempt at a non-threatening expression. He spoke again, longer this time, his gravelly voice gaining strength with each word. Karax seemed reluctant to translate, but eventually spoke. "The Alpha says you have shown courage beyond your size, and wisdom beyond our expectations. He places his life debt upon you, Dr. Mira Lang of Earth. The 10th Hunt stands ready to fulfill your commands." Mira blinked, suddenly aware of the cultural significance of what had just occurred. Life debts were sacred among predatory species like the Arkoth. They transcended normal hierarchies and could fundamentally alter power dynamics. "That's really not necessary," she began carefully. "I was just doing my job. Any trained xenomedical specialist would have done the same." Sarnoth growled again, and this time Karax's translation came more readily. "He says no other would have dared speak truth to the Arkoth healers. No other would have commanded warriors as if they were hatchlings. Your strength is not in claw or fang, but in knowledge that even the void respects." Before Mira could formulate a response that wouldn't further complicate the situation, alarms blared throughout the ship. The attendants tensed, and Karax activated a communication device on his armor. The news, delivered in rapid Arkoth language, clearly disturbed him. He turned to Mira with new urgency. "More warriors fall to the wasting. 3 ships report outbreaks. They come here seeking the human healer who saved Sarnoth." Mira's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of professional concern. "How many infected?" "Dozens, perhaps hundreds." "This is worse than I thought," she muttered. "It's not an isolated case, it's an epidemic. I need more supplies. dedicated containment facilities, and assistants who can follow basic hygiene protocols without invoking spirits every 5 minutes. To her surprise, Korax immediately began issuing commands that would fulfill her requirements. The attendants scattered to execute his orders without question or hesitation. "The Alpha's life debt commands absolute obedience," he explained, noting her surprise. "What you ask shall be done." Over the next days, Mira found herself at the center of an unprecedented situation. The Arkoth command vessel became a makeshift hospital as warriors from multiple hunting packs arrived seeking treatment. Mira established strict protocols, decontamination chambers at entry points, mandatory sterilization procedures, and quarantine areas for the most severely affected. The Arkoth, accustomed to being feared throughout the galaxy, now queued patiently to receive injections and follow the small human's instructions. Mira worked tirelessly, training the more adaptable warriors in basic medical procedures, while simultaneously researching the bacterial pathogen to develop more targeted treatments. "Your scales harbor bacteria," she lectured a group of warriors who had initially resisted the decontamination procedures. "Your sacred hunts expose you to countless pathogens. Your communal feeding rituals spread infection. And your refusal to acknowledge basic microbial science is killing you faster than any enemy weapon could." Rather than responding with outrage, the Arkoth began to develop a bizarre reverence for her blunt assessments. Warriors who had once decimated entire planetary defense systems now diligently scrubbed their claws before entering medical areas, chanting Mira's hygiene mantras as if they were ancient religious texts. Karax, who had appointed himself as Mira's primary assistant, attempted to explain this shift in perspective. "You must understand," he said as they cataloged treatment outcomes one cycle. "The Arkoth respects strength above all else. For generations, our strength came from claw and fang, from superior hunting tactics and fearless aggression. And now you're being humbled by microscopic organisms," Mira observed, not looking up from her data tablet. "Yes," he admitted, surprising her with his candor. "But we have found new strength in your knowledge. The warrior who adapts survives. This is our most sacred principle." As Mira's treatments proved increasingly successful, her influence expanded beyond medical matters. Arkoth ship commanders began consulting her about ventilation system redesigns. Hunt leaders adjusted their raid schedules to accommodate decontamination periods. The rigid hierarchy that had defined Arkoth society for millennia began to incorporate a new metric of status: medical compliance score. Sarnath, fully recovered and restored to his position as Alpha of the 10th Hunt, became Mira's staunchest advocate. He declared that her protocols were to be followed with the same devotion as ancient hunting rites, elevating hygiene to a sacred duty. News of the strange power shift spread across the 17 systems. Lesser species that had lived in terror of Arkoth raids for generations watched in disbelief as predator vessels broadcast Mira's hygiene mandates on universal channels. Diplomatic communiques from Earth expressed confusion and concern about Dr. Lang's unexpected role as the apparent medical authority for the galaxy's most feared predators. The true test of Mira's newfound influence came 3 weeks after her initial abduction, when the Grand Arkoth Council convened on the planet Ragar Prime to address the plague crisis. The council met in a vast amphitheater carved into volcanic basalt cliffs. 3,000 Arkoth delegates, representing every major hunting pack and territorial claim, gathered under the harsh light of twin suns. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the scent of sulfur from nearby lava fields. It was a setting designed to showcase Arkoth dominance, a harsh environment where only the strongest could thrive. Mira, standing on a central platform flanked by Sarnath and Karax, felt distinctly out of place in her simple Terran Science Council uniform. Yet she showed no sign of intimidation as the Elder of Elders, a massive, ancient Arkoth, whose scales bore the scars of 1,000 hunts, called the assembly to order. "We face extinction. The elder's voice boomed across the amphitheater. The wasting spreads. Traditional rites fail. Many among you have witnessed the human healer's methods. Now we must decide. Do we abandon our ways to survive, or maintain purity, even unto death? A cacophony of growls and hisses erupted as factions declared their positions. Traditionalists argued that accepting human medicine undermined the very essence of what made the Arkoth supreme. Pragmatists countered that dead warriors could not hunt, could not maintain the tribute economy that sustained their civilization. When the assembly finally quieted, the elder turned to Mira. "Speak, human healer. What do you ask of the Arkoth?" Mira stepped forward, her small figure a stark contrast to the towering predators surrounding her. Yet, there was nothing small about her presence as she addressed the council with the same directness she would use to lecture unruly medical students. "I'm not here to ask anything of you," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. "I'm here to tell you what will happen if you choose to ignore reality. The bacterial strain affecting your population is evolving rapidly. It's developing resistance to standard treatments. Within 3 cycles, it will become untreatable by conventional antibiotics." She activated a holographic display showing microscopic images of the pathogen. "This isn't a curse or a test from your ancestors. It's biology, simple, predictable, and utterly indifferent to your traditions or your status as apex predators." Angry growls rose from the traditionalist sections, but Mira continued undeterred. "You have a choice. Implement comprehensive medical protocols across all 17 systems where you operate, or watch your species decline into irrelevance, not in centuries or decades, in months." The elder's eyes narrowed. "You speak of abandoning traditions maintained for 1,000 generations." "I speak of adapting them," Mira corrected. "Keep your hunting rituals, your territorial displays, your dominance hierarchies, but incorporate basic medical science. The greatest hunters in history understood their prey. Now your prey is microscopic and you need new weapons to fight it." Sarnath stepped forward, his imposing presence silencing much of the dissent. "I was claimed by the wasting. The human healer returned me to strength when our most revered rites failed. I stand before you not as a supplicant, but as living proof of her wisdom." His declaration carried enormous weight. As leader of the 10th Hunt, one of the most prestigious Arkoth fighting forces, his endorsement could not be easily dismissed. Karax added his voice. "I witnessed the healing. I have seen warriors stronger than any in this assembly humbled by invisible enemies. The human speaks truth that we have been too proud to acknowledge." The debate raged for hours. Mira, accustomed to the methodical pace of laboratory work, found her patience tested by the ceremonial aspects of Arkoth decision-making. Just as she was about to interrupt with a particularly cutting remark about the correlation between meeting duration and bacterial growth, the elder raised all 4 arms for silence. "The council has heard enough," he declared. "We will vote." The voting process involved each delegate placing a ceremonial claw, a token carved from the actual talon of an ancestor, into one of 2 massive urns, one representing tradition, the other adaptation. The process took nearly another hour, during which Mira paced the platform impatiently, muttering about inefficient decision-making structures. Finally, the elder approached the urns, flanked by witnesses from major hunting packs. The counting was performed in ritual silence, broken only by the soft click of talons against stone as they were sorted and stacked. When the count was complete, the elder turned to face the assembly. "The council has spoken. By the will of our ancestors and the wisdom of our living strength, we choose adaptation. The human healer's protocols will be implemented across all 17 systems. Every vessel, every outpost, every hunting ground will conform to the new medical doctrine." Before Mira could process the implications of this decision, the elder continued, addressing her directly. "Dr. Mira Lang of Earth, The Council names you Supreme Medical Envoy of the Arkoth Dominion. You will establish standards for all aspects of health and hygiene among our kind. Your word in these matters supersedes all but the direct command of this council." The amphitheater erupted in a deafening chorus of ceremonial roars, the traditional Arkoth acknowledgement of a significant power shift. Mira stood stunned, suddenly comprehending the full magnitude of what had just occurred. She had not merely treated a few patients. She had fundamentally altered the structure of the most dominant civilization in known space. "I accept the position," she said finally, professional instinct taking over where personal astonishment failed her. "But I'll need resources, training facilities, a communication network, and most importantly, I'll need Arkoth apprentices who can eventually take over these responsibilities." The elder's expression might have been a smile, though on an Arkoth face, it looked more like a predatory grimace. "Already you think like a hunt leader, planning for succession. It shall be as you request." The implementation of Mira's protocols, as they came to be known throughout the 17 systems, represented the most significant cultural shift in Arkoth history. Across the Dominion, kill ships were retrofitted with decontamination chambers and research laboratories. Hunting parties underwent mandatory hygiene training before and after raids. Traditional healers learned to complement ancestral rites with evidence-based medical practices. Mira established her primary operations center aboard the Dreadscale, Sarnoth's flagship, which had been extensively remodeled to accommodate both her research needs and her human physiological requirements. From this mobile headquarters, she coordinated a growing network of medical facilities, staffed by the most promising Arkoth students she could identify. Among these students, a young healer named Malith showed particular promise. Initially, one of Mira's most vocal critics, she had undergone a transformation after witnessing the recovery of her brood sister from a severe case of the wasting. The bacterial cultures show promising adaptation to the synthetic growth medium, Malith reported during one of their regular research sessions. 6 months into the new medical regime, she had mastered basic microbiology with remarkable speed. "Good," Mira nodded, reviewing the data on her tablet. "That means we're getting closer to developing a preventative vaccine, rather than just treating symptoms." Malith hesitated, her inner eyelids flickering rapidly, a gesture Mira had come to recognize as indicating intellectual curiosity warring with cultural restraint. "I have been studying the historical archives as you suggested. Before the first hunt, our ancestors practiced different healing arts, less ritualistic. Evidence-based medicine often gets buried under ceremonial trappings," Mira replied, carefully neutral. She had learned to navigate these conversations delicately, encouraging critical thinking without directly challenging sacred traditions. "What did you find?" "Surgical techniques, herbal compounds with demonstrable antimicrobial properties, even quarantine protocols for contagious conditions." Malith's secondary arms moved in the gesture, indicating scientific excitement, a behavior she had unconsciously adopted from Mira. "They knew. Our ancestors understood infection before the Void Scriptures reframed illness as spiritual weakness. Knowledge is rarely lost completely," Mira said. "It gets transformed, reinterpreted. Your challenge isn't to replace your cultural heritage, but to rediscover the empirical wisdom that's been encoded within it." These philosophical discussions had become increasingly common as a new generation of Arkoth healers emerged, ones who balanced reverence for tradition with respect for scientific evidence. They represented Mira's greatest hope for eventually transitioning medical authority back to the Arkoth themselves. Not everyone embraced the changes. Of course, in the outer systems, particularly among isolated hunting packs, resistance to human contamination of Arkoth culture persisted. Reports reached Mira of traditional healers conducting secret purification rites, of warriors refusing vaccinations, of ship commanders neglecting decontamination protocols. When diplomatic approaches failed, Sarnath's hunters enforced compliance. These interventions were presented not as punishment, but as rescue missions, saving misguided brethren from their own ignorance. Still, blood was occasionally spilled, and Mira struggled with the ethical implications of her medical directives being imposed by force. "You cannot save those who refuse to acknowledge danger," Corax told her after a particularly difficult confrontation with a traditionalist stronghold on Nex 9, a mining outpost in the outermost system. Sometimes, the claw must strike before the mind can learn. "That's not how medicine is supposed to work," Mira replied, troubled. "Healing should be offered, not imposed." Carax's expression shifted to what she now recognized as his equivalent of a thoughtful frown. "Yet, you imposed hygiene protocols on our healers when you first arrived. You commanded warriors to scrub their claws and sterilize their feeding halls." "That was different," she began, then stopped, recognizing the inconsistency in her position. "No, you're right. I did impose those changes. I justified it because lives were at stake." "Lives are always at stake," Corax said simply. "This is the burden of leadership, knowing when to wait for understanding, and when to act despite resistance." These philosophical exchanges had become a regular feature of Mira's relationship with her Arkoth colleagues. What had begun as a purely medical intervention had evolved into a complex cultural exchange, with implications far beyond public health. 6 months after the Council's historic vote, the plague was largely contained. Mortality rates among the Arkoth had dropped to near zero, and the species had begun to expand its territory again, though now with mobile decontamination units accompanying every hunting party. The broader galactic community watched these developments with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that the Arkoth no longer carried deadly pathogens between star systems. Apprehension about what this newly organized, medically sophisticated predator species might do with their restored strength. Diplomatic overtures from the Terran Alliance suggested that Dr. Lang should return to Earth for debriefing. Mira declined, explaining that her work remained unfinished. In truth, she had come to find meaning in her role that transcended her original scientific curiosity. She was not merely studying life forms. She was helping reshape an entire civilization's relationship with the microscopic world. The culmination of these efforts came with the establishment of the Galactic Interspecies Health Accord, a framework for preventing cross-species contamination and responding to biological threats. 17 systems, once dominated by Arkoth tribute demands, now participated in a cooperative system of microbial surveillance and medical knowledge exchange. At the signing ceremony, held aboard a neutral station orbiting the galactic core, representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness the historic moment. The Arkoth delegation, led by Sarnath and flanked by Corax, entered not with the traditional display of weapons and intimidation tactics, but in sterilized ceremonial armor bearing the new emblem of their medical corps, a microscope superimposed over crossed claws. Mira, designated as Supreme Medical Envoy, signed the accord on behalf of both the Arkoth Dominion and the Terran Alliance, a dual role that symbolized her unique position at the intersection of two worlds. "Today marks not the end of Arkoth strength, but its evolution," she declared to the assembled dignitaries. "True apex predators adapt. They recognize threats regardless of size. They employ appropriate weapons for each enemy. The microscopic world has existed longer than any sentient species, and will outlast us all. Wisdom lies not in denying its power, but in learning to navigate its dangers together." Later, as the diplomatic reception continued without her, Mira stood alone on an observation deck, watching the swirl of stars beyond the viewport. The vastness of space still humbled her, despite all she had accomplished. Somewhere out there, the Pioneer continued its research mission with a new xenomedical specialist. Her former colleagues likely told stories about Mira Lang, the human who tamed the Arkoth, a narrative that missed the nuance of what had actually occurred. She hadn't tamed them. She had simply shown them a different kind of strength, one based on knowledge rather than physical dominance. And in doing so, she had transformed not only their society, but herself as well. The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted her reflection. Sarnath approached, his massive form moving with the fluid grace that had made his kind such effective hunters. He had fully recovered from the wasting, his scales now gleaming with health under the starlight. The delegates from the Zephyrian Confederacy wished to discuss specialized decontamination protocols, he informed her. They believe their atmospheric composition requires adjustments to the standard procedures. They're probably right, Mira nodded. Their methane-rich environment would affect bacterial growth patterns. We'll need to run simulations. Sarnath made the gesture that had become the Arkoth equivalent of a smile, a slight parting of the jaws without exposing the full array of teeth. A modification of a threat display transformed into a sign of respect. Once, we would have dismissed their concerns as weakness, he remarked. Now we understand that acknowledging vulnerability is the first step toward true strength. You're getting philosophical in your old age, Mira teased. Having long since abandoned the formal deference most species showed the fearsome Arkoth. Perhaps, he acknowledged, or perhaps I simply had an effective teacher. As they turned to rejoin the diplomatic proceedings, Mira reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She had never sought power or authority. She had simply followed her scientific training and ethical principles, treating patients regardless of species or status. Yet now, she stood at the center of a galactic shift, the human healer to whom the deadliest predators in known space looked for guidance. The Arkoth still dominated the 17 systems, still commanded respect and resources from lesser worlds. But their dominance now came with responsibility, not just for their own survival, but for the health of the entire galactic ecosystem. And at the heart of this transformation stood Dr. Mira Lang, who had treated a predator's wounds and inadvertently changed the course of history. As the Accord signing festivities continued into the night, representatives from worlds that had once lived in terror of Arkoth raids now engaged in animated discussions with their former predators about microbial exchange protocols and containment strategies. Warriors who had measured their worth in kills now spoke proudly of infection prevention rates and successful quarantine implementations. It wasn't peace, exactly. The Arkoth remained hunters at their core. But it was a new kind of order, one built on the understanding that true strength lay not in domination alone, but in adaptation, knowledge, and the wisdom to recognize threats of all sizes. And at the center of it all stood a small, human woman who had never intended to become the galaxy's most unlikely power broker, a xenomedical specialist who had simply done her job, one bacterial culture at a time,